Hey, we are headed out of Greenwater and on our way to the Habituation Conference in Bremerton. Bye, Greenwater! Hey, here we are coming into Bremerton. There's the shipyard. It's picking up. There's even a rainbow over there. Pretty cool. Say hi, Sandy.
Well, I can't turn my head.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Yes, I'm driving with my collar. Oh my God. Barb, do you feel safe?
Yes, I do. I'm okay. Hell, I'm looking at rainbows anyway. Hey, and we are here at the Habituation Conference. We're here.
Welcome to the Habituators Conference.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to hearing Bob Gimlin give us his opening remarks.
Yes, looking forward to it. Should just be a few minutes away.
All right, sounds
Cool.
good.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Bye. Here we are. Say hi, Laura.
Hi. He worked on the dam up in Hungary, where they don't have like a 500.
All kinds of neat stuff here. Hi. Got Sam. I got some stuff.
This is a 20-minute warning, a 20-minute warning. We're going to get started in about 20 minutes, just letting you know. Giving you heads up. I'll give you heads up in 10 minutes and 5 minutes left to go as well. So,
say hi, Mike. Say hi, Anna. Look at all the cool stuff they brought to sell. Sandy got us a drum. Hello. And here's the big room. We have Keith and his wife over here. We have Tom over here. Say hi, Tom.
We're talking glyphs.
Cool. And this is Dr. Johnson's stuff. More things over here. There's Dr. J on stage. It's going to be great.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who had difficulty getting out of bed this morning. And I know her really well, which is why I can tease her like that. She shows up at our monthly meetings in Puyallup all the time. I know her really well. She has some incredible stuff going on in Greenwater, Washington. I'd like to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Barb Shoop.
Barb Gabby, and I make the Squatchin with Barb Gabby videos you may have seen on YouTube. I live in the tiny community of Greenwater, North Mount Rainier in the Cascade Mountains. And, well, we've got some Bigfoots up there. Let's see. Bear with me if I stumble a little, because I'm not quite awake. I got a little fog still going, so. This is Gabby. She's my Squatchin buddy. She can't be here with us this weekend, but you're going to get to look at her cute little face for a few minutes while I get started on some of my favorite adventures. So, some of the things that I experienced over the years, one of the first things, the very first time I went up the trail behind my cabin, I found a really clear footprint and 2 broken trees. And immediately I knew what that was. But, you know, that was back in 1992. And we don't really know a whole lot about them back then. And so I was under the impression that this was one lone individual that was probably just passing through from one place to another. I never would have figured that he was there all the time or that he had a family that was there all the time. So in the following years, I experienced all kinds of strange things. You know, I'd find strange structures in the woods and I'd hear strange things. I heard an owl that growled once, and you know, that made my blood run cold. Let's see. A lot of times I think there were drunk people in the woods at night because I just hear these strange voices out there that I couldn't understand what they were saying, and I just assumed people got lost in the woods on their way home from the local tavern, things like that. So one of the first major things that I experienced was about 10 years ago. It was a nice, beautiful, sunny afternoon in the summer. I was out in my yard, and this is the roof of my cabin and the trees above it. I was standing there and I saw this black ball of hair drop down out of the top of that tree. It hit a limb, and instead of catching itself, trying to break its fall, it used that limb to propel itself over the roof of the cabin to another tree, where it dropped down to another limb, propelled itself back over the roof of the cabin, hit the corner of the porch roof, and was gone from sight. And it all just happened just like that. It had no tail, it had no wings, it stayed in a curled up position the entire time it was in view. And from where I was standing, all I had to do was lean back a little like this to see the ground in front of the porch. And I fully expected to see some poor broken creature laying there, and there was nothing there. I ran over there and looked, and there was a chicken standing on the porch, and she's just frozen like this, all puffed up. And so I knew she saw it too. And I think what happened was when he came down and hit that roof, he went around the far side and down into the creek bed and back to the woods. So if I had actually run in that direction around, I probably would have saw it again. But over the years, you know, my mind went back to what this could have been. And by process of elimination, I kept coming back to juvenile Bigfoot. And back then, I just couldn't accept that, you know? I mean, to me, it seemed just ridiculous to think there would be a juvenile in my tree in my yard. You know, I was a fully believer that they exist, but I just couldn't accept that. You know, no matter how many times I thought about it, it wouldn't sink in. So we're going to skip ahead to late summer of 2012. And this is at our house that's at the upper end of the valley, about 5 miles up from where the cabin is. And I was sitting there on the couch one night about 10:30, and I'm watching TV. My husband's asleep upstairs, and the dogs are asleep on the floor beside me. Something hit the side of the house so hard that it rattled the windows. And the dogs were up, they went off. My husband, he's hollering. It's like, I don't know what that was, you know. I ran out, I looked off around the side of the house, and there's nothing there. Okay, well, that's weird. So it was about a week later, about 10:30 at night again, and I'm sitting there on the couch. But this time, the TV's off, the window's open, and I'm just playing bingo on my iPod. Suddenly, I hear this sound. It didn't register at first, you know. I'm in my bingo game. I'm not thinking about it. I heard this sound, and then it did it again. The second time it did it, it registered, and my head popped up so fast that it's a wonder I didn't get whiplash. Because I knew what this sound was. I had never heard it in real life before, but I had heard it in recordings. It was just like the Ohio howls or the Puyallup howls, where it's the long, drawn-out siren scream. And I heard it a total of 4 times. Of course, I'm sitting there with the iPod in my hand. Not once did it ever occur to me to turn it on and record. But I told my husband about it, and he told me, well, you can't say that was a Bigfoot. You didn't see a Bigfoot make that sound. You can't say that's where it came from. All right. So about a week later, he comes to me and he says that he had heard it too. He'd woken up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and he's laying there underneath the open window trying to get back to sleep, and he said that he heard what he described as, it reminded him of the air raid sirens he had heard as a child back in D.C. But of course, he still wouldn't believe that it was a Bigfoot, but I knew. So after that, I started asking people at work. I worked at the little general store there in town, and when locals and neighbors, people that I knew would come in, I'd say, you know, did you ever hear anything weird, see anything weird out there? And, you know, being a small town, I was under the impression that if we had Bigfoots around, you'd know about it, because in a small town, everybody talks, right? But no, nobody ever said anything about it until you started asking them. And once you asked them, I was amazed at how many people came forward and said, yeah, that they had either had a sighting or they heard something or found footprints. They had had an experience. And a lot of the people that hadn't, you know, it opened up conversation with them, and after talking to them a while, a lot of them would have that light bulb moment, and you could see it on their face when suddenly they'd realize there was that time when something was throwing rocks at us, or things like that. So it got to be kind of a community thing at that point, you know, where people would come when they'd have an experience and they'd tell me about it. So we're gonna skip ahead to the end of October of the same year. I'd gotten up one morning, went up to our local coffee shop to get my cup of coffee, and there's a couple local guys that are sitting in there, and we were talking about a few howls that had been heard the night before. And the one guy, he's a retired timber faller, and he's telling me he knows where the Bigfoots live. He said that in the valley that's on the back side of the mountain behind my cabin, he says back up there in the 70s they were logging, and every morning they'd show up and oil drums and tools, things that they needed, had been thrown off the landing down into the valley below. And he was sure that that's where they lived. Well, in all the years that I had spent hiking that trail and around that mountainside, I had never actually gone all the way to the top of the mountain. It was just a little too steep and too intimidating. So after he told me that, I decided I was going to make it my personal thing, that I was going to get to the top of that mountain and get a look at that valley. So my next day off was a Wednesday. It was November 1st, 2012. And I was tired. I spent most of the day just kind of sitting around thinking about it. And finally, you know, the afternoon rolled on. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to make this hike. So I packed my water bottles and my knocking sticks into my backpack, and off the trail Gabby and I went. And it was pretty much uneventful. We got up toward the top, and it was pretty steep up there and a little rugged. And we just found a spot where the trees opened up to a nice view, and there was a good solid stump there beside the trail. So we decided, well, okay, we'll sit here and have a little break before that push to the top. So we hadn't been sitting there for more than a few minutes, and I started hearing this talking from the forest down below me. And thinking, okay, well, there must be some hunters down there. So we sat there, and a few minutes later it got louder. But it wasn't getting louder like it was getting closer. It was getting louder like it was getting more animated, more excited. And at this point I could tell that it wasn't English. And I'm thinking, is that German? We got German hunters down there? Okay, well, that's weird. So I'm sitting there, and there's the picture that I took. I had the iPod in my hand, took a picture, never once thought to turn it on and record the sounds. But of course, I only thought it was hunters. So there's Gabby. She's sitting there looking at the same place I was. So we sat there for a few more minutes, and it got louder again. And at this point, I can tell that this is no language that I had ever heard before. This is bizarre, this sound. And now I'm thinking, I'm still not thinking Bigfoot. I'm thinking of every mutant horror movie I had ever seen. And now I'm thinking, okay, we've got mutant German hunters down there. So I'm a little nervous. I'm not really afraid. I'm nervous. So I'm thinking, I don't really want anybody shooting my direction, but I don't really want to give away that I'm a female up here by myself either. So I had this great idea. I got my knocking sticks out, and I just gave them a whack. Instantly, everything stopped, went dead silent. Okay, all right, well, I guess got the message across, you know. So I'm sitting there, and, you know, finished our little break, and time to get going up the hill. And I started to put the sticks back in the bag, and I thought, yeah, what the heck, one more time for good measure. Gave him another whack. Instantly, from directly behind me, I hear this deep growl grunt, and I turn around, and behind me, the brush is so thick right there that you can't see more than a foot into it. And whatever this was just a few feet into that brush. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, bear. There must be a bear up here. Well, we got to get going. So we continued on up the hill, and it wasn't far to the top. We got up there, and it opened up onto an old landing where we could look down and see the whole valley down there. It was very steep and very narrow. On the far side, I could see some rock cliffs, and I got my knocking sticks out, and I did some knocks and listened to it echo down through the valley. And well, you know, I got to tell you, I was really disappointed. I didn't get any kind of a response from a Bigfoot. Kind of a letdown. So it was getting a little late. The sun was getting low in the sky, and I knew we had a ways to go to get back to the cabin, so we headed back down. And it was pretty much an uneventful trip until we got about halfway down the mountain. We got to a little stretch where we come across a logging road, and then it goes down around a switchback, and the stretch of trail goes right between the upper and lower sections of road. We were about halfway down that stretch of trail when I hear this very loud human-like whistle from right beside me. And I looked, and there's nothing there. And at this part of the forest, it's pretty open. You can see, and there's nobody there. And instantly, it's followed by another whistle directly below us on the trail. And I'm looking down there, and there's nobody there. Okay, well, this is weird, you know? And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's elk, you know, elk whistle. I've never heard a whistle like that, but maybe it's elk. Okay, so we continue our hike down. We got down to the lower stretch of the logging road, and from there I knew the trail was really steep and rutted and not very safe, so we decided to take the logging road the rest of the way down. So we hadn't gone much farther, and Gabby, she's walking ahead of me, and she stops and looks back at me, and I know there's something ahead of us. And we got up around the next bend of the trail, and sure enough, there's a couple elk standing there in the road. Okay, that's what it was. It must have just been the elk, you know. So we keep walking, and the elk just kind of look at us and step off over the edge as we go by, which is pretty much typical for them. We got on down around the next switch back on the logging road, and I looked up on the hillside, and sure enough, there was the whole herd just standing there. It's like, well, cool, there's the elk. So we kept walking. We hadn't gone maybe another couple hundred feet, and all of a sudden I hear all this crashing behind me. I turn around and look, and here comes that whole herd of elk down off the hillside, across the road, and down through the forest right on my left. And I'm like, oh, well, there goes the elk. And then I saw it. It was just behind the elk, and at first it was facing me. And for that first split second, I thought, gorilla? We don't have, oh my God, it's Bigfoot. That was when it sunk in. So for that first split second that I saw it, it was facing me. And I could see that it had a huge, massive jaw, kind of a flat nose, very dark, deep-set eyes, a massive brow ridge. But over the brow, it didn't have a forehead. It just went straight back. And it had these two bony ridges that went up on either side of the head, which made it appear to look really sunken in the middle, like it was almost caved in. And after that split second of facing me, it turned and it continued in the path of the elk, and it appeared to be completely focused on them. And it was behind a little cluster of vine maples that had the last of the leaves on it. This is a sketch that I drew at the time. So I could only really see it from about here up. And when it turned, I could see that those bony ridges went straight back into this huge, massive cone. The head had to have been that wide. It was huge. So I'm watching this, and it gets to the end of the leaves. It's following after the elk, completely focused on them. It gets to the edge of the leaves, and I'm thinking it's going to step out, and I'm going to get to see the whole body. So I'm watching, and it gets to the edge of the leaves, and there's nothing there. It was just gone. And I'm thinking, well, how am I ever going to tell anybody about this? I know nobody's ever going to believe this. I can't tell them I saw Bigfoot and it disappeared. You know, so I'm standing there and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking. I'm trying to figure out where it went. I'm waiting for it to reappear. And several minutes went by. I looked down at Gabby, and she's staring at the exact same spot I am. She didn't make a peep the whole time. So I knew she saw it too. So, you know, probably 10, 15 minutes went by, and I'm thinking, well, it's starting to get dark. We got to get going. We got to get back to the cabin. So we headed on down the trail, and nothing else really happened. And I spent the next couple of weeks trying to wrap my head around what had happened. You know, I'd go to work, and I could talk about hearing the talking, and I could talk about the whistles, and I could talk about the growl grunt, but when it came to the part about saying I saw Bigfoot, it was like, and I think they're going after the elk. Well, I went back up there several times in the next few weeks, and I looked at where I was, and I looked at where it was, and I looked at the lay of the land, and finally I decided, well, it must have just dropped down flat to the ground so fast that my eyes just couldn't see it, and then it must have just crawled away out of sight. And that's how I rationalized it to myself. And at that point, I felt okay that I could talk about this because I had a rational explanation that I could understand. So about that time, I contacted the BFRO, and Mike Beers came out and investigated my report. We spent the afternoon hiking around the mountainside, and I took him to the location of each event. And he told me about some of his experiences, and he told me about gifting, and he told me about footprints, and he told me about structures, and I was pretty excited about this. You know, after all these years, to know that there was actually Bigfoot, that all the things that had been going on that I had been experiencing, the thing that had fallen out of my tree, it jumped out of my tree, now all that suddenly made sense. So I started spending a lot of time in the woods, and on one of the first days that we had snow, it wasn't very much, it was maybe about that much, I went up the trail, And I got up to the logging road, and I went up, and there's no tracks. There's nobody else that's been in the woods. We went up the road, and there was a few elk tracks crossed, and we turned off onto a little spur road, and there you could see where a coyote had passed. And we got to a little spot where there's a tree that's really close to the edge of the old road there. And the limbs on it had sheltered the edge of the road just enough that there was bare ground right there, and just a little edge on the edge of the snow. So I found 3 prints that were there. That print that was at the edge of the snow underneath that tree. There were 3 of them. 2 of them were kind of smeared. This was the really clear one that was there. And if you look right here, you can see the knuckle marks right there. And this little crease right in here, I tried to recreate this with my own hand, and this part of my hand, no matter what I did, I couldn't make it like that. Mine was much narrower, and the only way I could do it would be to make a fist and kind of roll it in the snow. And right across here, my hand was very squared off and very flat. But this little crease right there is from this right here. So I was pretty excited when I found this. And I knew that there was a lot of information in the woods around my forest that could be potentially very valuable for people to learn from. And I knew that there had to be other people out there like me who had been living in places like this and been having these experiences and just didn't recognize them for what they were. So that's pretty much when Squatchin with Barb and Gabby came to be. I started making videos of what I was experiencing and finding it and posting it on YouTube so that I could share this information with people. It was about 3 weeks later. I had been out recording mostly just stick structures and things that I had already found in the forest and seen things that I knew were out there, but I wanted to get some vocalizations recorded. So I went out about 1 o'clock in the morning one night, but Gabby and I went up the trail, and there was about 6-8 inches of snow, and I cut a little notch on a down log, and I propped the iPod in there and turned it on to record. And I got my stick out, and I walked over the edge of the trail, and I gave a cottonwood a good whack. Well, let me tell you, there is nothing that makes a better wood knock than a frozen cottonwood. It just vibrated up out of the tree and echoed out into the forest. I was like, wow, that was cool, you know? I'm standing there and everything's quiet, and I'm not really thinking about anything other than just listening, thinking, okay, come on, I want to hear a howl, I want to hear something. And then I started hearing sounds coming from up on the hill, this direction. Something was coming toward me. I could hear sticks breaking and movement. It was coming. And about the same time from back behind me in this direction, I could hear something coming. There were sticks breaking and something was coming toward me, although it wasn't quite as loud as what was on the hill. And then I started hearing something coming from the other side of the creek, up on the swamp, and it sounded like a freight train coming through the woods. There was crashing and breaking, and it sounded like trees coming down and stomping, and it had my full attention. And I'm facing the creek this way, and I know there's still 2 coming behind me, but I don't really care. I'm facing this one. And at one point, I realized my heart was stuck up in my throat, and I'm thinking to myself, what on earth have I gotten myself into now? So it got to just across the creek from me, which was maybe 100 feet away, and it stopped. I figured, okay, well, at that point, it probably could see me and knew that it was me, and it stopped the approach. And about the same time, the 2 that were behind me, they stopped the approach too. So being really, really new at this and not having a clue what to do next, I just kind of stood there and listened, and I could hear them rustling around. They were still there, but I couldn't see anything, just these sounds. And I thought to myself, oh, what the heck, let's whack the tree again and see what happens. So I did. Not a good idea. They got really riled up. I could hear a lot more sticks breaking this way and a lot more sticks breaking this way. And the one that was across the creek, I could hear the stomping and the thumping. And it's like, okay, lesson learned, we're not going to do that anymore. And at that point, I went back to the cabin. And of course, I checked the pod, and the only thing that you could hear on it was the sound of my wood knocks and our own footsteps crunching in the snow. I didn't pick up any of it. So I had gone back out a couple days later and checked the area, and I started up by the swamp on the other side of the creek, and I found a trackway of 12-inch footprints coming down the far side of the creek, and you could see where there had been trees had been pushed down and then broken stuff, and it had left quite a trackway. And across the creek where it had stopped and was watching me was the biggest patch of yellow snow I had ever seen. It was huge. And then I also discovered that those tracks continued on down the creek and had followed me back to the cabin. So Anyway, that was one of my first big experiences out there with them. In the spring, I had made another trip back up the hill, and instead of taking the trail or the logging road, I decided to bushwhack it up to the top. Well, it was pretty steep, didn't have the camera out. We climb up through the woods, and everything's normal, not finding anything unusual. We got up to a place where it levels out, and the logging road and the trail all come together about where we had heard the whistles. And directly ahead of me, as we come up over the rise, I see this black creature explode from a treetop. And all I can see is this black arm reaching out. Otherwise, it's in a ball shape, just like the one that had been in the tree in my yard. But this is much bigger than the one that was in my yard, although it was considerably smaller than the one that I saw chasing the elk. So it jumps out of that tree, hits the next tree. That tree sways, and it starts shaking the branches violently. And then it continued on through the tops of 4 more trees before it disappeared. So Gabby and I went back up there a couple days later, and we found this 12-inch footprint directly underneath the first tree. And we found a left-hand print and a right-hand print not far from that footprint. So, wasn't much longer. It was that summer, early summer. We had the summer season at the store, things get busy, so the boss's grandson had come to help out. And Anna, the boss's girlfriend, the manager, we decided we were going to take him up the trail and just show him some structures and stuff. Just some interesting things, you know. So we headed out just a little while before dark, and I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't have the camera out, you know. We were just talking and laughing, and I had heard some noise ahead of us on the trail, but I wasn't really paying attention. I got up there a little ways. I'm ahead, Sterling's behind me, Anna's in the back. All of a sudden, there's this explosion of activity that's right beside us on the trail. And I look up, and I can see the weeds, the little bushes, ferns and stuff just getting mowed over. You know, everything is just getting flattened. And, but I can't see what's doing it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, whatever it is, it must be just flat on the ground, because I can see stuff going down in a pattern like this. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's crawling. And it ended as quick as it started. And I turned around and said, did you see that? Did you see that? And then they're like, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, well, what color was it? What color was it? And they're like, black, black. Okay, great. That's what I've seen up here. They're always black. And it took a few minutes before we realized that we hadn't all seen the same thing. We were all looking at a different place when it happened. Whereas I had seen something pushing the weeds over that I didn't see. Sterling behind me had seen a creature that he described as a little bigger than Gabby on all fours, 20 feet from the trail, looked right at him, and then jumped over a log and was gone. Anna had been looking a little farther back at the tree line. She saw a black upright figure. She saw it from the back and the shoulders, and it stepped back behind a tree, and it was out of sight. So after that, I went down out and looked, and the swamp where I had seen stuff being mowed over, the muck was too deep. Even my own tracks were getting filled in behind me, so there was really nothing there other than that path of weeds that were mowed over. Down by the creek, I found this print that I suspect is like knuckle marks, but down here you can see where it's also kind of flattened. So it makes me think maybe this was like a fist print that was overlapped with maybe a knee print. And then at the lower end of the swamp, I found this. This was 6 inches wide. It's kind of hard to tell here, but you can see where the fingers had gone down into the mud, rocked on the knuckles, and then before the hand actually left the ground, right here, there was like this little divot where a little finger had gone in. And that was what I found after that. I go to a couple of weeks later. It was once again just before dark. We started up the hill. It was me and Gabby, and I got my camera is on my walking stick now. So it is on and rolling whenever I'm in the woods. Whether I'm not actively making a video, it's just recording just in case. So Gabby and I get up onto the logging road, and we start hearing these very musical whistles from the forest down below us. So we stop and we listen. Well, that's pretty cool. Okay, so we go up a little farther, and I start to hear squirrels and blue jays going off in the forest just above us. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that usually means there's something around that they don't like. So I stopped and sat on a stump next to the trail and just sat there and listened for a while. And I could swear that I could hear rock clacking at the same time as the squirrel was chirping. But it was right in perfect time, so it's like, is that rock clacking? But I couldn't make it out exactly over the sound of the squirrel because it was perfectly timed. But I was sure that was rock clacking, okay? Well, it was getting late, starting to get, a little dark, and we needed to finish our hike, so I got up, and as soon as I stepped back onto the road, I heard 4 of the most bizarre owl calls I ever heard in my life. They sounded huge. They just blew me away. Like, wow, that is really awesome. It was coming from right above us, right at the edge of the tree line. Okay, well, that is really something. Well, we wanted to be predictable with what we were doing, so we continued on the path that we normally would take. We went on up the hill, maybe a couple hundred more feet, before we turned around to come back down. And when I turned to go up the hill, I could hear whatever it was up at the tree line, moving down through the trees, down toward the road, back along the edge of the road. And I'm thinking, okay, they're anticipating the path that I'm going to take when I come back down. So sure enough, when we came back down, everything was quiet as we passed the spot where we heard the owl calls. But when we got down a little farther, up on the bank, there's a little cluster of little bushy trees. All of a sudden, about 20 feet ahead, one of them trees starts shaking just really hard, really violently. And at that point, Gabby comes racing down the road behind me, puts herself between it and me, and then instantly you can see she realizes what she's just done. She turns her back to the bush, looks up over her shoulder, and kind of grins like, oh, just kidding, just kidding. She's kind of a scaredy puppy. So we continued back down, and before we went down around the last bend of the road, I turned around and just went, whoop, and I got this big, long musical whistle came back to me. So we went back up the next day and we examined the area. We found a trackway of 12-inch footprints coming from the top of that tree line where I had heard those calls. You could see where the weeds were crushed down, where it had gone all the way down to that tree that had been shaken. And I also discovered that right up there behind a rise of ground out of sight was a little tiny dry creek bed full of little rocks. So I think that was where there was a second one there that was actually making rock clacking in time with the squirrel. So my good buddy Sam, Squatchin pal here, has amplified the sounds that I recorded that day, and we're going to play them for you. Can we turn it up at all?
You got it.
One more coming. Okay, so that was the first time that I had heard these bizarre owl calls when they were associated with footprints and something shaking the tree at us, and I knew that that was not an owl. So we're going to skip ahead from there, and we're going to move on to May of last year. This was our first camp out. And it was a total success. There weren't very many people that joined us, just a few friends, but we had some really amazing experiences. Just incredible night walk that may have scarred Gabby for life. We had whistles around our camp. We had a glow stick that we had hung down below our camp in the darkness that we watched vanish while looking at it, and only to reappear about 45 minutes later hung from a different limb. Little structure that was built right there next to it on the trail. But the highlight of that camp out, at least for me, was my good friend Sandy here had a sighting in that area just a few months before, and she had found something in the area that she really wanted to show us. And it was actually in the exact location of her sighting. So be prepared. This is like the coolest structure you will ever see. Oh, that was sorry, brain buzz. Okay, so this is it. Yeah, look at, okay, so bent there, here, and curled all the way back here.
Oh my word.
Back.
So it's back behind this one.
Oh my gosh. Look at that. That is amazing. And then it's against that one there. That is really something.
Isn't that awesome?
This is one tree.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And that was found in the exact location where she had her sighting. Pretty cool, huh?
Yes.
So we're going to skip from there to our next camp out in September. And there was a lot of great stuff happened over the summer. You know, between our own experiences and the reports that we were getting from locals and people that were vacationing, every week there was something new. It was just a blur of activity throughout the whole valley. But when we had our camp out in September, we knew we were going to have some good activity. We knew we were going to have fun, but we had no idea. We couldn't even begin to imagine what was actually going to happen. We went up on the first day up the trail behind the cabin, just to take a little tour of tree structures. That was all we were going to do. There were 9 of us started up the trail that day, and it was a little breezy, and we heard a couple wood knocks, but we kind of thought maybe it was because of the breeze, so we didn't think a whole lot about it. We got up there a little ways. We broke off into 2 groups. My dad, his wife Juanita, and Lee, they went on ahead up the trail a little ways where some trees were down. They were going to wait for us there. And that left Sandy and Claudia, her husband Dan, Sam, and Larry, and Gabby and I. We went off the trail just a little ways into the woods to get to this first structure that I wanted to show them. Well, and from that point, Sandy, she continued farther back into the woods. She wanted to check her gifting area. So we step up to this tree. Sam and Larry are kind of right here. They're facing me. Claudia, she's off to the side right here. She's kind of facing the tree this way. I'm facing this way. Dan, he's kind of down here in a low patch of ground. And Gabby, she's just going back and forth between Sandy and us, keeping an eye on everybody. So I'm standing there. I got the pod on. It's on the stick. I'm not actively making a video. It's just on just in case. I'm not even thinking about it. We're talking about this tree. And all of a sudden, about 80 feet in front of me, I see this black creature pop up and take off running. And I'm like, did you see that? You know, what the heck was that? And it had a domed head, no neck, kind of rounded shoulders, black hair. It had its back to me, so I couldn't see any face or anything. And when it took off, just for an instant, the tree that was right here blocked it from my view. But I leaned and then I could see it continue. And it was mowing over little trees and stuff. And I could see although it appeared to be in an upright position, I could see the arms pumping like this as though it was running. And Larry and Sam missed it. They were facing the wrong way. Dan, he was too low. He didn't see it. But Claudia, she was standing there. She saw it too. I knew the camera was on, and I knew it was aimed in the right direction. So I had high hopes that we had gotten something on camera. We were pretty excited. We went back to the trail where Dad and Lee and Juanita were waiting, and I knew it had run in that direction. And I had hoped that them sitting there on the trail that they had maybe seen it too. Well, they had heard the commotion, and when it happened, Juanita's little dog on her lap, had looked that way and barked, and Juanita looked that way. They didn't see anything. They did hear some stuff. But Juanita said when she looked back, directly across from where she was sitting, about 75 feet into the woods, she saw what she described as a small black monkey came head first down a tree and disappeared into the brush. So there we know we have at least 2. Okay, the smaller one that I saw, it was about that high off the ground, but it was behind a rising ground, so I only got to see it from about waist up, but it was small. And the little tiny one Juanita saw. So that's pretty cool, you know, we're excited about this. And we continued walking on up the hill, and we went off up to the left and saw some elk and a few other things, and came back and ran back into Sandy. She was coming up this way. And she was kind of surprised to see that we were coming back from this direction, because she said she had heard what sounded like a woman's voice up on the hill. She couldn't make out the words, but it sounded to her like a woman calling her children. So she was really surprised that we weren't up on the hill this way, we were up on the hill this way. But she had no idea what we had all experienced just a little while before. So later that day, we got back to camp, and I sat down by the fire to start going through the day's footage and see what we had got on camera. And when I first saw it, I'm looking at my little screen on the iPod, and I'm thinking, well, that's not what I saw. What the heck is that? So I put it on a little bigger screen on my computer, and I'm looking at it, and then I'm thinking, okay, the iPod can't do this. This is like Hollywood stuff. I don't know what this is. This couldn't be on the pod. So we put it onto a bigger screen, And then we went up to Dad and Juanita's motorhome where we put it on the really big screen. And at that point, I think I went into shock for a little while because this was unlike anything I had ever seen, and I was completely unprepared for this. So before I show you the clip, I also want to tell you that we went back the next day, and what you're going to see here from that spot, we found 2 sets of tracks, 11.5-inch footprints leading away from the area. One in the path of the creature that I saw, one that continued farther back and went around a log and disappeared. So I'm going to play the original clip from that day, and that will loop, I think once or twice, and then it'll zoom in. And then at the end of that, my friend Sam here has done a little analysis on it that might help shed a little light on what it is. But it has been analyzed many times, but I don't know that we'll ever really understand what was there that day, 100%. So that was our camp out, the members. Here's the clip.
Something hit this hard enough in the middle that it broke it there, but it didn't knock down either end. Both ends are still suspended.
Wow. Pretty cool.
Yeah, so something had to have hit it really hard and really fast right in the middle to break it there, to not break these smaller pieces that are supporting it at either end.
Yeah, that had to have been, you know, like a thrust and not a hang, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause if
something
if
hard
hung
and
on it
fast.
for any amount of time,
The heck was that? Did you see that?
Sam's been checking it out. Like a thrust and not a hang, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause if
something
if
hard
hung
and
on it
fast.
for any amount of time,
The heck was that? Did you see that?
And Sam's been, you know, like a thrust and not a hang, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause if
something
if
hard
hung
and
on it
fast.
for any amount of time,
The heck was that? Did you see that?
Sam's been.
Hard and fast. What the heck was that? Did you see that? Now, I had heard of cloaking before this, but I wasn't a believer. I always thought that cloaking was a matter of being really fast and blending into the environment really well. Now, my eyes have been opened. There are other things going on out there in the woods that we really need to observe and be prepared for. So, this is the analysis here that Sam did. And one of the things we noticed was it appeared to have a neck. Well, Bigfoots don't have necks. And this would explain what it is, why it appears to have a neck, because it wasn't actually one, it was 2. It had another one on its shoulder. So, like I said, we went back the next day. We found 2 sets of 11.5-inch footprints leading away from this area. One that went in the path of the one that I saw. I did not see this. I didn't see anything. There was nothing there before I saw the one pop up, which was actually about 10 feet farther back from where this was when we measured it out. And then there was the second set of footprints that went straight back. Thinker Thunker did an analysis on this, and he actually found when it turns and drops, there's a foot that came out. He could see the foot, and in the background, he could see trees bending over as it took off. And I was out there, and these trees are maybe that big around, and I can't even barely make them, the leaves at the top shake when I push on it, let alone make them go over like this. So, anyway, that's my cloaker clip. So, so I just have a couple more things that I want to talk to you about. I want to touch on gifting a little bit. My fears when he came up, he told me about gifting, and after that I started just leaving an apple or a candy bar wherever I went in the woods. Eventually I got to the point where I had picked a special spot, a stump where I would leave gifts, and I put an upside down milk crate with a big rock on top of it to try and rule out, other wildlife, keep raccoons and things away from it, and that worked pretty well. And more recently now, I have a bucket that I have suspended 10 feet in the air that every week I leave a pie, a jar of peanut butter, and some apples in. And every week they're gone. So, one of the things that I did was leave out jars of peanut butter. And it took probably 6 months of leaving a jar of peanut butter out there before it was ever touched or taken. And one of the first jars that I found that was actually opened had been opened by squeezing the jar. It had popped the lid off. And you can't really tell from this angle because the jar is about that thick where it's squeezed. You can see that there is still peanut butter in the lid, and it appears that it was dug out with a stick. So that was the first time that we found a jar of peanut butter that had been gotten into, and ever since then, I'll go out every week. My pie tin is there. The container that it was in is there. We very, very rarely ever find peanut butter jars anymore. They just are gone. So knowing that somewhere in the mountains there is a large accumulation of peanut butter jars, trying to cut back on that, I recently switched from leaving a jar of peanut butter in the bucket to a block of cheese wrapped in wax paper. Oh, back up just one more thing here. We also left a pear. We found it was a little soft. They didn't really like it. They took a bite out of it, and we got some pretty good teeth marks in it. Pretty cool, huh? So about the peanut butter. I switched it to cheese, and I don't think they liked it as much. Although the cheese is gone, you know, they take it. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was, I'm going to be out of order here. We're going to go this way to there. I walked out to the edge of my driveway, and I saw this little scrap of paper there, and I'm a little annoyed thinking some kid had walked by and dropped his candy wrapper. So I go over and pick it up. It turns out it's one of the wrappers off one of my peanut butter bottles or jars. So I suspect that's their way of saying, can you please have peanut butter again? Now every other week they get the peanut butter and the block of cheese. But the one other thing that I've been gifted from them recently, which I just think is really cool, it was just about 6 weeks ago. I got home one night, I got out of the car, and I look out in the woods just across the road from the cabin, and there's white eye shine looking back at me over there. And I heard vocalizations, not quite as cool as those owl calls that I heard before, but pretty close. And then we went back out and we found some footprints that were there. And just a few days later, I'm walking out to the car, and I see these bones on the railroad tie at the edge of my driveway. And my first thought was, well, geez, Gabby, when do you start dragging in bones? You know, and she never does that. So I went over and I looked at them and I realized these aren't actually attached, they're arranged that way. And right here, we have a back vertebrae that actually has a rib jammed into it that is part of this shape that's arranged there. And since then, this little piece right there has disappeared, but the rest of the bones I have in the other room in there if you want to come and take a look at them. So I guess that about wraps it up. The one last little thing here, Gabby doesn't get a whole lot of attention when I'm telling my stories and stuff. So I made a little clip to just kind of show you what Gabby's like in the woods when she's all happy and having fun. She bounces around and she's just a goofball. So this is typical happy Gabby. But when the Bigfoots are around, she's a completely different dog. Like I said, she's a scaredy puppy. She lets me know what's there. So anyway, that's Gabby in action. One last thing I want to tell you, one last little word of advice. Not everything in the woods is Bigfoot, but when the Bigfoots are around, not everything in the woods is what it seems. Observe everything, pay attention to everything, take in every detail, because at some point in time you're going to want to go back and refer to that and just absorb everything you can. Whether it's Bigfoot or not, it's good to have that database of information to compare to in the future. So just take everything in. So I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody.
on Squatchin.
Okay,
Yeah.
we will, guaranteed.
You and Gabby.